Hey everyone, Dr. Frunkey here with a rather special knife consult. This is the Ferrum Forge Stinger. This knife is special to me for two reasons. Number one, I've never experienced a Ferrum Forge knife before. Ferrum Forge is known for making some really high-end, sort of mid-tech, pretty much custom knives. They've collaborated with some awesome people, and they've done some interesting things with materials, and that's why this knife is so interesting. Elliot Williamson, the owner-operator over there at Ferrum Forge, has been working with the company Summit Materials to bring to market a brand new blade alloy, and that is called SM100, and that's what makes this knife so special. The blade is not made of steel, but rather made of SM100. SM100 is a titanium nickel alloy that has all the properties of an excellent blade material with none of the drawbacks of corrosion and things like that. Like I said, SM100 made of titanium and nickel. It was developed for NASA because NASA is always looking for materials that are corrosion resistant and very strong. Apparently, when they made ball bearings out of SM100, they outperformed any conventional steel ball bearings that are currently available. Apparently, it generates great edge retention. It generates nice hardness, toughness, and wear resistance. All the things you want in a blade alloy without containing any iron, which would make it susceptible to corrosion. So no rusting going on here, but all the properties of a very high-end steel. So very, very cool on that. Something else that's interesting about SM100 is if you've seen some of the other custom makers who have gotten their hands on some pieces, namely Frank Fisher and a few other folks, they have done some very interesting heat anodizing to it. If you take a flame to it, apparently it gives it this amazing Vulcan-like finish with these crazy oranges and blacks and things. So definitely go and check those out. When this knife was originally produced, it had a bit of a different color to it according to the owner, and that has faded with time. So I'm not sure what property of the metal really allows it to change its color over time. But apparently it will do that. Maybe it was anodized slightly. Some of these blades look to be a little bit light blue in some of the pictures on the advertisements. Perhaps that's what this one looked like a while ago. But now it's got sort of a dull gray finish and some marks that don't really wipe off. And I don't think that's from use. Some of these marks are from use. You can see out there at the tip there. But the change in the finish, not really sure what brought that about. I'm not really a chemist or a metallurgist. I do have a chemistry background, but inorganic was not really my area of expertise. So I do like the full flat grind. It's nice and thin behind the edge, and it will slice very nicely. It's got a Shirogorov type grind going on there. Very big fan of that. Nothing getting in the way of the cutting edge. It's got a nice sharpening choil. And the blade does sharpen relatively easily. Something that's very scary about some of these exotic alloys is that apparently they're going to be really hard to sharpen. I was able to get this to a very keen edge on just a Spyderco Sharpmaker, and it made a huge difference. This knife came to me rather dull. It was not sharp enough to even cut paper, and now it's got a nice fine edge. A good test is just putting it on your fingernail and seeing if you can move it back and forth, and at no point here can you do that. It's got a really nice fine edge on it, and I like it. It does function really well. This is cut through cloth. It's done a small amount of food prep, and it's definitely cut open some paper and some packages over the last few weeks. And it functions really well. It's 0.17 inches in thickness, so rather thick for a small blade, but it gives it some strength. It's really perfect for almost all EDC tasks. A lot of these knives, when we're getting into this thicker category, they're not going to be the best apple slicers, but it will work well if you need it to do some food prep. It does work fine in that area. So very impressed by the blade alloy, very impressed by Elliot's work in bringing this to market. He really has made the push to make this a blade alloy, and he is committed to getting it in multiple other knives in his lineup, and some other makers have been getting into it as well. So thanks to him for that, for expanding the knife world in that way. Moving back, let's talk about the pivot here. It rides on a ball bearing pivot that is very smooth. It's got a nice smooth opening and closing. It's a rather light blade, so you do have to shake it a little bit to close it, but not because of it not being smooth. But I will say that this is probably my least favorite part of the knife as it stands. I'm trying to get this to focus here. And that is for one very specific reason, and it's something that Ferrum Forge does on the majority, if not all, of their knives. And that is that the pivot on the back here is actually just a pin. rather than a fixed hex, rather than a deed-in pivot, it's just a pin. And something that's been a problem ever since I got the knife is off-center. All right, let's just look at that right there. Clearly, that blade favors the presentation side over there. It's not very straight, and that's a problem to me. I'm OCD about things like that. I want my knives to be perfectly centered. But when I took the Torx driver to this, all that happened was that this freely rotated, and the pivot didn't get any tighter. And I could not, for the life of me, find anything that would hold enough traction to allow me to tighten down that pivot and recenter the blade. And so this has remained off-center, and that's why I'm not really going to form a total final diagnosis on this knife, but rather just leave it a consult, because I carried it some, but not enough to make the full-on final diagnosis. So I will give some final thoughts on this knife, but there's a reason. There's sort of a delineation between the consults and the final diagnoses videos, and that's about it. It is rather smooth. Interestingly, it does have a Hoback rolling detent, which should allow you to adjust the detent tightness so you can get a snappier action or a looser, slower action. However, in the setting of a pivot that won't adjust appropriately, that Hoback rolling detent is really lost. I adjusted it in and out, and I barely noticed any real significant difference in the overall snappiness of the action, I think just because it's slightly off, and I'm a little bit upset by that, I'm not going to lie. Moving back, we have some 6AL4V titanium handles done in what is called the Poseidon finish. Poseidon being, the god of the sea. So this is a very nautical looking finish. It kind of looks like the ocean. It's a nice distressed finish. I'm a huge fan of these distressed anodizing so that you can use the knife and it won't really show any wear. There are a couple of little snail trails on here, but they're not really showing through because people have been... the finish doesn't really allow them to show too well. So I really do like that about it. There's a nice spring pocket clip. This knife is certainly designed for use and for carry. With a clip like this, it rides relatively low. And when you tuck it into the jeans, because of the orientation of those screws, it sort of forces it to kind of be sitting against the back of the pocket. Your hands will slide right past it. You're not going to have any trouble getting things in and out with a relatively small knife. The handle is 4 inches in length. The blade length is 3.3 inches, so an overall profile of 7.3 inches. So not really too bad. So how does this thing carry? I already mentioned the clip is really nice. It's got a perfect amount of tension. It's easy to get in and out of the pocket. Those 2 screws allow for a nice gripping point right there. The overall weight is really not too bad. Let's go ahead and bring out the scale here so we can see what the weight is in ounces. We've got a 3.53 inch or ounce knife right here. Speaking of inches, let's go ahead and bring out some other knives for a size comparison. I've got a Riot Knives Steelcraft Bodega, which is considerably bigger. I'll bring out my standby ZT0392 3.5 inch blade, similar to a 0562. I've got the ZT0055 out here right now for a size comparison. How about we bring out a VDK War Admiral, a little bit of a smaller knife right there as well, but with a chunky blade. I've got a Liang Ma GSD right here, another small carry option out there. If you want to have another small knife on the screen, something that always belongs on the screen is the Frank Fisher and Robert Carter Knives Talon. One of the most beautiful blades I've ever seen. It always belongs on the camera. And just for last but not least, we've got a Riot Knives K1, a little bit bigger. So I got to get myself one of those reference knives so that we can have some comparisons going on here that everyone understands. In any case, it carries very nicely. Nice overall weight, nice overall package, and some interesting materials. Now, what are my final thoughts on this knife? To be perfectly honest, I can't recommend this knife. And that's for 2 major reasons. Number 1 is that pivot. It's not really adjustable. Apparently, some people who have these knives, apparently Ferrum Forge does this on most or all of their knives, and some people have problems with it, some people don't. I've been unable to adjust the centering, and that has really annoyed me. Secondarily, this knife costs $975. $975 for a knife that I can't adjust with a blade material that is nice, but kind of exotic and may not really be necessary. So I can't really recommend this knife in its current form. It is interesting, but thanks for watching, guys. As always, this is Dr. Frunkey saying take care.